By late October 1781, the British rescue fleet was finally off the Virginia Capes. It had come with transports, troops, ships of the line, and a plan that had already expired. Somewhere inside the Chesapeake, Cornwallis had stopped firing. Small boats worked the coast for news. Then the truth came out. Yorktown had surrendered. Captain Thomas Simmons put the fact in the language of a man reporting a wreck. The garrison of York and the vessels in the river had surrendered by capitulation after a siege of 17 days. Clinton and Graves had not arrived as saviors. They had arrived as witnesses. That is the right place to begin Yorktown, not with drums and flags on the surrender field, but with a relief force staring at an empty operational horizon. The campaign was not lost in a single assault, nor in one dramatic naval action, nor even in Cornwallis's final decision to ask for terms. It was lost by a command system that could not decide what mattered most until the enemy had already decided it for them. For senior officers, Yorktown is not a patriotic tableau. It is a case study in theater design, command ambiguity, coalition timing, maritime access, and the fatal habit of treating hope as a plan. In the spring of 1781, Cornwallis had fought his way through the Carolinas and reached a hard truth. He could win actions and still lose the campaign. Greene's army had survived. British posts in the lower south were exposed. The Loyalist rising on which the whole southern strategy depended had not produced decisive strength. Cornwallis, aggressive, proud, and often too willing to see motion as decision, looked north to Virginia. There he found magazines, rivers, tobacco, shipyards, and the possibility of choking off the Southern War at its source. Clinton, cautious and increasingly fixed on New York, had already sent forces into the Chesapeake under Arnold and Phillips. By the time Cornwallis arrived, Virginia was no longer a raid. It was becoming a commitment. Here the British command problem sharpened. Clinton wanted a presence in Virginia, but not necessarily a new center of gravity there. Cornwallis wanted freedom to campaign, not to sit behind works. London wanted pressure in the Chesapeake. The Navy wanted an ice-free station for large ships. These were not the same requirement. No one resolved the difference. Instead, letters crossed hundreds of miles of water and bad roads, each one slightly changing the last order. In a campaign measured by tides and fleet movements, the British command chain moved at the speed of paper. By July, Clinton and the naval officers had settled on the requirement that mattered least forgivingly, a station in the Chesapeake for ships of the line. Portsmouth might serve frigates. Old Point Comfort had the right geography but not the right protection. Yorktown and Gloucester, facing each other across the York River, looked like the least bad answer. Cornwallis did not love the position. He had inspected alternatives. He understood that a post on a peninsula could become a hostage if an enemy fleet took the mouth of the bay. But Clinton's instructions pressed him toward a naval station, and the Navy wanted a harbor that could shelter serious ships. So Cornwallis occupied Yorktown in early August and began fortifying both banks of the river. The irony was brutal. A post designed to protect ships tied an army to water it did not control. The York River divided Cornwallis's force. The Chesapeake gave the Royal Navy a route in, but only if the Royal Navy could command it. Once that assumption failed, the geography changed sides. Operationally, this is the first lesson. Terrain is not fixed. It belongs to whoever can integrate it with time, fires, movement, and sustainment. Yorktown was defensible under one maritime condition. Under another, it was a prison. While Cornwallis dug at Yorktown, Washington and Rochambeau faced their own problem. New York was still the obvious British center. It was also heavily defended, hard to reduce, and dependent on a French fleet that might not be available where Washington wanted it. Then de Grasse changed the campaign. From the West Indies came word that the French fleet would sail for the Chesapeake. Washington did what good commanders do when opportunity appears only briefly. He changed the axis of the war. The Allied army broke from the Hudson in August. Clinton watched, guessed, doubted, and guessed again. Reports reached him that Washington might be moving toward New Jersey, Philadelphia, the head of Elk, or Virginia. Some of that intelligence was accurate. The problem was that he did not believe the part that mattered in time. Washington's movement was not magic. It was staff work, secrecy, coalition trust, and logistics done under pressure. French troops marched beside Continentals. Boats waited at the head of Elk. Governors were warned. Supplies had to meet soldiers at exactly the right river mouths. The decisive maneuver of Yorktown was not the siege. It was the march that made the siege possible. On the 29th of August, de Grasse entered the Chesapeake. He brought the fleet, roughly 3,000 French troops, and the one thing Cornwallis could not manufacture from earthworks, maritime isolation of the battlefield. De Grasse's troops moved up the James and joined Lafayette. De Barras sailed from Newport with the siege train. Graves came south from New York, thinking he might intercept de Barras or force the Chesapeake open. Instead, on the 5th of September, he found de Grasse already inside the bay. The Battle of the Capes was tactically inconclusive in the narrow sense. No British Trafalgar appeared. No French annihilation followed. But operationally it was decisive. Graves's fleet was damaged, his line mishandled, and after days of maneuver he returned to New York. De Grasse remained master of the Chesapeake. De Barras slipped in with the guns. For Cornwallis, that was the campaign. He could still count rations, thicken parapets, and await letters promising relief. But the instrument that could save him had failed to open the door. Yorktown reminds officers that sea control, air superiority, cyber access, and space support are not supporting abstractions. They are operational permissions. Lose the permission and the ground plan begins to die. Lafayette's role was not glamorous at first. He shadowed Cornwallis, avoided being crushed, and kept the British commander under observation until heavier forces could arrive. That kind of economy of force mission rarely wins statues. It wins campaigns. When de Grasse landed Saint-Simon's French troops, Lafayette's small corps became a blocking force with teeth. Cornwallis now faced a growing enemy at Williamsburg, a French fleet in the bay, and Washington and Rochambeau moving down from the north. Virginia militia thickened the countryside. The peninsula began to shrink around him. Cornwallis still had options in early September. He could try to smash Lafayette before Washington arrived. He could attempt a hard march out of the trap. He could abandon stores and guns. Every option was ugly. That is exactly why one of them had to be chosen before all became worse. He waited. There was a logic to waiting. Clinton promised exertions. The Royal Navy might return. Yorktown had provisions. A premature breakout could look like panic. But command is not a search for respectable reasons to delay. Command is the art of choosing while choice still exists. On the 28th of September, the Allied army arrived before Yorktown. By the 6th of October, the first parallel was open. 3 days later, the batteries began to speak. This was the slow violence of professional siegecraft. Engineers traced lines in the dark. Working parties dug under fire. Artillerymen dragged guns into position and turned geometry into destruction. The British perimeter, never as strong as Cornwallis needed, began to contract under round shot, shell, and red-hot fire. On the 10th of October, the British ship Chiron burned in the river. The image mattered. Yorktown was supposed to protect naval power. Now a warship was aflame inside the defended space, visible proof that the harbor had become part of the killing ground. Washington had to keep pressure on Cornwallis without giving Clinton time to arrive. Rochambeau had to sustain French discipline and engineering competence inside a coalition command. De Grasse had to hold the bay long enough but not forever. Every part of the Allied system had a clock attached to it. The siege worked because the clocks aligned. British clocks did not. By the 14th of October, 2 British redoubts still blocked the second parallel. They had to be taken by storm. The French attacked Redoubt 9. The American light infantry attacked Redoubt 10. Hamilton, eager, ambitious, and not wrong about the importance of the moment, led the American column with unloaded muskets and fixed bayonets. The assault was fast, disciplined, and savage. The Americans were inside in minutes. The French took their work in the same night. The tactical gain was obvious. The Allied second parallel could now be extended, bringing guns closer to the British line. The operational meaning was worse for Cornwallis. His perimeter had been bitten through. The next batteries would not merely batter his works, they would make continued resistance look like slaughter. For officers, the redoubts are a reminder that sieges still have decision points. Engineering creates the conditions. Fires isolate and weaken. But eventually someone must close with the defended point and take it. Yorktown was a coalition campaign, a maritime campaign, a logistical campaign. At redoubts 9 and 10, it was also infantry combat at arm's length. After the redoubts fell, Cornwallis finally reached for movement. On the night of the 16th of October, he tried to ferry troops across the York River to Gloucester, break through, and march north. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was now the only honest estimate of the situation. The weather smashed it. Some troops crossed. The storm rose. The passage became impossible. By morning the army was still trapped, now weaker for the attempt. The relief Clinton had promised was not at the Capes. It was still in New York, delayed by damaged ships, councils, repairs, and the same friction that had marked the entire British campaign. Cornwallis had written that if relief did not come soon, Clinton must be prepared to hear the worst. The worst had arrived. On the 17th of October, Cornwallis asked for terms. He later wrote that continuing would have been wanton inhumanity. He was right. Courage had nothing more to purchase. The tragedy for the British Army is that Cornwallis was not a fool. Clinton was not a fool. Graves was not a fool. Yorktown is more frightening than that. It shows competent men trapped by bad design, slow decisions, divided authority, and assumptions no one killed in time. On the 19th of October 1781, the posts of York and Gloucester surrendered to the combined forces of America and France. British soldiers marched out as prisoners. The naval force in the river became a French prize. Cornwallis was absent, pleading illness. O'Hara carried the humiliation. The war did not end that afternoon, but British policy did. Lord North's ministry would fall. The Empire would keep fighting elsewhere, but the American colonies were not coming back under British control. A local surrender had produced strategic decision. The ledger is plain. First, Yorktown was a coalition victory. Washington needed Rochambeau, de Grasse, de Barras, Lafayette, Saint-Simon, French engineers, American infantry, militia, boats, wagons, and political patience. None of them alone could close the trap. Second, the campaign was joint before the word was fashionable. Land power fixed Cornwallis. Naval power isolated him. Siege artillery broke him. Logistics delivered the army to the right place at the right time. Third, command ambiguity kills. Clinton wanted options. Cornwallis wanted discretion. The Navy wanted a base. London wanted results. The result was not flexibility. It was diffusion. Finally, Yorktown punishes passive hope. Cornwallis waited for relief. Clinton waited for clarity. Graves waited for readiness. Washington, Rochambeau, and de Grasse moved. That is why the harbor became a trap. Not because the British lacked brave men, but because the Allies built a campaign in which British bravery no longer mattered enough.